Hey guys, welcome to the Rum Club Australia. Great to have you all back. I hope everyone's logged in okay. We are going to start going live here. So we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook if you need to find us there. But basically, this is going to be something that I guess working in the digital world these days, we're all finding a little bit interesting. This is Rum Club Australia, specially designed today for the Fitzroy Rum Club and for Bakari Martini. Basically, today was really about getting together everyone down in Melbourne who's still in lockdown. Don't worry, I'm in Sydney. We're still in lockdown as well, so it's everyone. And just having a chat about the history of rum. And let's face it, to get together again. It's been really important during lockdown over the last year, I guess 2 years really, to try and have these regular get-togethers for all of us. But it's been a tough time for a lot of you as well. So having the chance to be social, do what we love, which for me has always been masterclasses and hanging out with you all. It's important to be able to have these opportunities to have these chats. So today was specially curated by Bakari Martini with Loy Katata and myself, just for a chat about the history of rum. I'm going to introduce Loy here as well. Loy, are you there, buddy?
Hey guys, how are ya? Good to see you again, Tom. How are you?
I'm good, buddy. I'm good. Good to see you.
That's good. Thanks for having me here, man, on your platform. And I'm really excited to share with you our new category training for rum, which is Rums of the Caribbean. It's a very, very unique, and may I just say also
Hey, Cal.
a very it was a long journey. Originally, we wanted to create this platform as a face-to-face training post lockdown last year, so that we can intimately join together in a big space with a few people, with a big map, a war map, that is, with some battleships and flags and some rums, and have a chat about the story and the category of rum and how it developed. So now we're in the virtual space, and
well, mate, I think for people in Melbourne, this is what, lockdown 6, 7. Like it's crazy. And I always say this is kind of our COVID baby of a sorts, because I think it started as a chat between you and me about how do we explain rum to people, and how do we really try to make the entire category like stand out, and I guess this is what we came up with.
Exactly. And I hope you guys are paying attention, and also, like, there's a lot of information that we're going to impart. You may or may not know some of them. Some of them are new information. I've actually, as a company with Bakari, we wanted to create a category training. No one's ever done it before, really, in terms of any brands. We want to see the rums in a holistic way, and also look at Bacardi in a categorical point of view, because we always talk about Bacardi. We always talk about, as a company, we talk about our founder, Don Facundo. We talk about Cuba.
Well, you got to talk about it, mate,
Exactly. But, we never really look at the aspects of how the scale of how significant that particular development of rum is. So I wanted to look together with you the rest of the Caribbean rums, where rum actually originated.
Well, mate, it's really exciting that Bacardi could do this, and to go into the whole category and talk about that was a fantastic opportunity for us.
Yeah, amazing. And and also, look, in terms of that, we really wanted to get the information, not just about Bacardi, but about the different styles of rum. When we talk about rums, we obviously we talk about the traditional colonies or European powers that colonized the Caribbean. So we have English style, Spanish style. We're gonna cover all that, but thanks to passions of people like Tom and some of the industry experts that we've come across, they've really given us some really good information about and new information as well about rum. And this information, Tom, is not new. They've been together, but no one's really put them together into a story.
I know.
So we're really excited to share this with you guys.
No, it's fantastic, mate. And look, so just so everyone knows, anything you actually want to ask today, we definitely want to hear from you. It's all going to be through the channels. You've seen a couple of messages pop up already. If you write anything on Facebook on the comments, or if you write anything on YouTube in the comments, you'll actually be able to write in and say hi to us, or ask any questions throughout it. It's going to be a really nice sort of smooth presentation. There's a lot to go through, as Louis said, but if there's any questions you have, please write them in. Otherwise, also just join us afterwards. We're going to throw it up on Zoom. You should have all gotten a Zoom link as well that will connect you to have a little chat after. I don't know about you, but I think after 6 rums, I like to have a little chat. So I think it'll be great. Oh, should we? Did everyone get their can?
I just remember, before we forget, let's open up with a Bakari Mojito, shall we?
Stay fresh. 3 p.m. So I think that's about right.
That counts.
Thanks, buddy. Cheers, guys. Cheers, everyone at home.
Cheers, everyone. Ooh, nice and cold as well.
I put mine in the freezer earlier, so I'm actually very happy with that.
Yeah, it's delicious. For those of you who haven't tried it yet, I hope you enjoy it. It's as close to what we can get. It's like 114 calories, so not very.
One shot, as opposed to the rest we've got today.
Yeah, exactly. So pace yourself.
All right, so just everyone should have their pack of 6 in front of them. I know we sent them out a little bit different. Look, today we sent them out with a new company as well to try and expedite it, because Australia Post has had a real struggle. But if there's any problems with your packs, please just let us know, because we do want to make sure you get the right packs and everything's okay. If for any reason you haven't received your pack, just let us know. We're going to have more chats, and this live link is always going to be around as well. So we're going to be able to definitely come back to this. I think, Lloyd, there's definitely going to be a trip to Fitzroy Rum Club with Jacob Goss and the Rum Diary team. I think we've got the mat. As soon as the borders open, I see a trip coming.
I think so. I'm looking forward to it, actually, guys.
Yeah, definitely, mate. So ultimately today we're going to do this presentation, which was actually designed on a 2-meter leather map, on a bird's eye view, and we've integrated that with some pictures to get us along. But I guess more to the point, we should kick off and get started. I hope everyone's got their rums in front of them and some tasting glasses. Probably don't have it straight from the bottle. But where are we going to kick off today, Lloyd?
Well, let's start off by showing everyone what the map looks like.
Definitely. So the map itself. So there it is. I mean, it really is a beautiful design at the end of the day. We see the real focus around both colonies here. So we've got the Caribbean down here through to South America, the Americas, and all the warring nations that we saw try to encapsulate it. Now, guys, I'll just put it out to the audience. Throw in the comments, where do you think that sugarcane, I guess, rum started its journey? Anyone want to hazard a guess? Throw it up in the comments if you feel like it.
And for those of you who've seen this presentation, just maybe keep it to yourselves for now. But
this is true.
Also, just wanted to talk before we start out on obviously when we talk about rum, we talk about sugar cane, because that's essentially what rum is made from. But as a category, that's probably where the similarity stops. It's such a diverse rum, Tom. Like if you think about
I know.
The different styles of rum, they taste differently, and that's the reason why we're doing this, because we want you and the bartenders and our industry experts to be able to help our customers navigate through those sea of rum in your bar, and also the flavor profile. If you actually, like, for example, this mojito is fantastic. It's made from Bakari Casablanca, but if you actually change it to a different style of rum, it's a totally different cocktail altogether. Don't you think, Tom?
Well, look, I think that when you speak about the styles of rum you use in a drink, I mean, there's such a varying category. And to be honest, this is actually why I stayed in rum and why I love rum so much. It's because you speak about rum, and when I started bartending a couple of moons ago,
I
You know,
remember
there was only
that.
there was only there was only three rums in most bars, which was, you know, it was always Bacardi, Bundaberg, and maybe Mount Gay if you're lucky. And to describe that is just such a varying style and varying quality that it just made no sense. It was crazy to think about that. And you know, it the fact that they were so different. Gin was pretty much the same back then. The whiskey was always the same, except for maybe Islay whiskey. But rum was just like those three, especially. It was crazy.
And
Um,
exactly, and the reason why we kind of like managed to kind of like answer that question is that why is it so diverse? And we came up to the same conclusion that hey, it's not made by one person. It's not made by one country or culture. It's actually made by a number of people or a number of
yeah,
nations in parallel to each other. You know, so they just decided to ferment or
mate, it
distill
was.
molasses and
Yeah, it's the spirit of the Caribbean, and because so many cultures and people have been involved over the years, it's I always consider it almost like an evolution. Like each island evolved
yeah.
with each culture, things they ate, people they saw, spices they had, everything really defined it, and that really
And
like
you can
sets up the tone of it.
100%,
Yeah,
100%.
for me, the story of rum is the story of sugar as well, and that journey. So.
Yeah, great.
All right, so we had a couple of good guesses. Some people said a couple of people said Cuba actually, but actual fact, it really started its journey a little bit further, I guess west or east, depending which way you go. But rum really was something that started right all the way over near Australia. So it was right in Papua New Guinea where we start to see the early emergence of sugarcane. And the fact was, it sort of spread throughout the continent. A lot of that early travel, the Silk Road, etc. But we see it start to really develop throughout the New World and come across through the Arabian Peninsula. A lot of people know the wars with the Moor people and the Arab Springs, and that's when it really started to find its way into the New World. It was an amazing time. Obviously, everything was coming from these long distances and these long times, and sugar was one of those things because when you think about it, there was only honey as a sweetening element back then. It was a crazy sort of time where there wasn't many additional sweeteners, and let's face it, the food wasn't that fantastic either back then. There was no gourmet cooks, and so to find this new honey of sorts that provided sweetness to your dishes was an amazing feat for everyone.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
the New World really attached us. Well, sorry, not the New World. The European powers really attached themselves to it. It was
It,
it was a crazy time, and to be able to get your hands on sugar was an immense attribute to the wealthy. You know, the Venetian ports would start to fill with it. The English like found out about it, and you know, for you to have sugarcane or sugar granulated sugar was intense. Um,
it was an exotic spice. It was pretty expensive. Um, it was so hard to come by that it was more expensive than gold. And you know, like you can see,
no,
like in history books, that back in the 14th century, even the early 14th century, that like a kingdom like Spain would only have a kilo of sugar.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and
Yeah,
it's not a sugar that you would use in your coffee or tea. It wasn't like that. It was a really exotic thing. Like it's a special ingredient that you would use.
it was crazy, mate. And you know, you think about why did Europe feel the need to travel? Why did they feel the need to explore again? And you see, I guess, like you said, the wealth and opulence that would be attached to this. People seeking it to demonstrate their value and their wealth was just as important. And I guess, you know, you wonder why did exploration start and why did sea exploration start? And you consider that value and that cost. People were paying for it. So this
I
was
love
the start.
Yeah, I love that word of back then. That spice is actually for them. Spice is exotic. It was a symbol of power and wealth, like sugar. You know, like when you talk
Yeah.
about that, it's like it's not from here. You know, it's so hard to come by. It's rare. that kind of thing. So obviously, by that by I guess the you know the as a century passed by, it became really
Mm.
apparent that whoever controls the sugar trade and make sugar in mass somewhere in their territories can gain immense power.
Yeah, yeah, and this is what kicked off the exploration. It was time to explore. Like obviously the Mongol Empire as well, and after the Black Plague had really closed down the Silk Route. So we saw a race fundamentally, the new race for space,
Yeah,
as
yeah,
we would
exactly.
define it today. But that was the time. So we see the Portuguese moving into Madeira and the Spanish starting to move into the Canary Islands and starting to really explore what was west. It was really important that we consider the attribute, the timing as well, because while the East Indies had actually really taken over, like the concept of international trade fundamentally between the islands that they could see across their channels, the Spanish and the Portuguese saw nothing out there. There was nothing further west for them except for just open ocean. So the idea of exploring those further lands was a crazy, crazy time. Let alone following things further west. I mean, they're only further south. The Spanish and the Portuguese exploration further south was only a dangerous path, especially after the Moor invasion. Um, so it was a crazy, crazy time.
Well, in addition to that, Tom, when you said about space exploration, it was kind of like that. The
Mm,
technology at the
mm,
time was like, the Portuguese and the Spaniards, they actually had the technology to explore the open seas by creating these bigger ships that can last longer, and they can have more men. It's almost like, like the galleons and all those ships.
mm,
It's amazing. But then you think about it, if you look at that era here around about the 14th and the 13th century, it was the Portuguese who was the ultimate explorational power, naval power at the time. They've established a lot of ports in the south, all the way out to the what we call East Indies or Asia. So that's the reason why Columbus and Spain wanted to travel west, because they wanted to see a route around there. They thought, oh, that's an open space. We can claim that particular trade route, and we can do our trade that way rather than, and we can
yeah,
supersede
yeah.
all those Portuguese colonies, and
Well, mate, you know
yeah.
what's really crazy? I think I was reading a recent book, and to his dying day, Christopher Columbus never realized that he discovered the New World. He actually believed he discovered the East Indies,
Yeah,
so the Papua New Guinea and etc. To his dying day, he never
fantastic.
accepted
Yeah,
that that
that's
wasn't
crazy.
Asia fundamentally. So it's crazy. But yeah, we see Christopher Columbus take off as well, and he really moves into the New World, into Hispaniola. I think you were the one telling me, like in it wasn't his first trip, but his second trip where he started to bring the sugarcane across as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really quite interesting because I thought he stopped by in the Canaries on his second voyage, and not only did he take cuttings, but he actually got people who's experts in sugar, kind of like production and growing sugarcane, and took them to the Caribbean and introduced it
Mm.
there, which is quite interesting. Um,
You know what's crazy about that? I was reading an old dialogue book, and they actually said um, that Christopher Columbus had stopped by in the Canaries. It was one of the registers of ships on board, and it said because he had favor of the lady, of a local lady. And I mean, I'm just going to put it out there, like having favor of a local lady in those days sounds like a booty call.
oh man,
So maybe sugarcane wouldn't have been on that boat if that wasn't the case.
probably not. I don't know. But by the way, in the Canaries, there's the volcano, right? That's
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, wow, that's when I saw that in the news, I thought, oh my God, like we were just talking about the Canaries. It's a
Well,
very
mate,
historical
yeah.
place.
it's
Um,
it's it's an amazing story. Yeah.
yeah, so there you are. So that's really quite ironic because like um, you, the Caribbean is really quite that's when the European powers realized how good it is to grow sugarcane there,
Yeah, yeah.
and that you can actually make it. So that was the first time that sugarcane was ever introduced,
Well,
which
when
is
they
quite
came, yeah,
amazing.
when they came by, they realized it just grows like wildfire. I mean,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
know that because it grew up in Papua New Guinea, so we knew that the Caribbean islands would be essential. But in those days, they just didn't have that foresight. They just planted it and realized that this was its home fundamentally.
exactly. And so when the news returned to Europe, the race was on. Like everybody wanted to take a piece of the Caribbean. So this is
Mm.
where the story starts. Essentially, guys, this is where our players, the British, the Spaniards, the Portuguese, and the Dutch in some aspects, starts
Yeah.
to fight for the domination of the Caribbean and the New World. There was wars, as you can see. They have the war dates in there. Um, there was
Well, the
enslaved
Portuguese definitely
people.
weren't happy about this, were they?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But let's talk about the Tordesillas line.
Yeah, definitely. So the Tordesillas line pretty much kicked off the war between the Spanish and the French, Spanish and the Portuguese, because the Portuguese had found all those lands to the had rounded Cape Horn over there and sorry Cape of Good Hope, and had found their passage to the East Indies, but the Spanish had found their route to what they thought was the East Indies as well. So the Pope, being a very smart guy, very savvy, decided to divide the two routes between the relevant powers, and when we start to see that divide in the Tordesillas line to really secure the people's lands. Now we know that the lands were of America and of Africa through to the East Indies, but at this time they believed they'd both had their access routes to the East Indies. So it was really interesting to see that they could fundamentally divine the powers between these
Yeah, well,
two
that's really
people. Two,
quite interesting because like the Spaniards really wanted to consolidate on what they found, and the reason for that is because the Portuguese has already got all those ports and colonies around the south of Africa and all the way to the east, so they wanted to like not get Portugal involved. That was quite smart, but also you got to remember the Pope was the Spaniards as well, so it was a little bit of a bias there. So it was really quite unfair for the Portuguese when they basically took exactly what they've already got.
yeah,
And so you can see in this particular slide here, guys, that there was that line. Anything on the right belongs to the Portuguese, whatever they discover, and anything on the left belongs to the Spaniards. And you can see the weighing of undiscovered countries in there is unfair on the Portuguese side. That's all I'm
yeah,
saying.
yeah. No, it was definitely a curious time, and
Yes,
we
exactly. And now you'll see by in the 1500s, this is where the Portuguese comes in. It's actually they discovered a particular land, and this was by accident. It was quite interesting because what we find is that we have this particular Portuguese explorer by the name of Vasco da Gama. Now, what he's done is he's actually circumnavigate Africa all the way down to the south and around the eastern side of Africa, landing towards the East Indies, around
mm,
Macau, all the way to India, and what we now know Ceylon. But there's a gentleman by the name of Cabral. He was a Portuguese commander. A years later, he wanted to follow Cabral's route, but what happened was um, he veered off a little to the west just to get out of the coast of Africa was a little bit unstable in terms of weather and hurricanes. So the Armada was caught by what we now know as the trade winds, the transatlantic
yeah,
trade winds, which goes in a kind of like a circular motion. You can see in here. So when he veered up a little bit to the west, he got caught by it and got lost by sea. And by the I guess the end of the 1500s, that year, they landed in what we now they called it Veracruz, but we now know it's Brazil. So
yeah,
uh, this particular they initially they thought it was an island. They thought, oh, this is quite new. And when they realized where they were, they thought, oh, well, this is on our side of the Tordesillas line. We'll claim it for Portugal. So they claimed it for Portugal. And then as they explored the area, they realized how rich it was. But not only that, it was absolutely vast. And immediately they planted sugar cane in there, but also mining was prevalent. It was quite a rich, rich land. So
wait, they discovered land that just continued to go beyond. You know, they didn't know how far it went, but they knew how to plant. They knew how to that they'd found something of significant mass, and
absolutely. And so in the next 2 decades, they were a major supplier of sugar in Europe, and that's when it comes to the early 1500s. Portugal was dominant. They were the dominant force in sugar production.
No, it's crazy when you think about it, like the extent at which that the powers had to claim this land, and they really did exploit, like not exploit, but they really did continue on the growth of the lands and trading with local people. You know, one of the attributes of the Portuguese, where they always said that the commanders would bring gifts for the local people and really try to work with them to sort of find the new colonies that they had. So it really was an important time for them. And let's face it, after so many years with the Spanish as well over land, they didn't have to see them. The Pope had decided this, so they actually had this attribute and the ability to continue growing.
Exactly. And look, this is quite interesting. This is where our story of rum starts, really, this particular side. When the people working the fields in Brazil, they realized that sugarcane can be fermented into some sort of a beer. Obviously, beer doesn't last long in the ocean, so you can never get beer from Europe to the Caribbean because they'll just spoil. So they decided they wanted to make some sort of beer, but the grains doesn't really grow there that well. So they decided to do it by fermenting like the grains that they have, like maize, and using that like a sour mash to accelerate the fermentation of what they called cachaca, right? This particular drink that they call cachaca. That's kind of like where they were like getting the reprieve from that alcoholic beverage. And then in I think 1543, Tom, which is on the next slide, you'll see that there was a gentleman by the name of Erasmus Snels in 1543 who brought the first still in Brazil, essentially distilling this cachaca and creating the first known cachaça, which is distilled in a pot still. And it became quite an interesting beverage because to the Portuguese, it was quite an exotic treat. You know, they will import that. And you will find in this particular story around the Caribbean that importing things from there is not really a good thing for European powers, because the reason why they were like expanding and conquering all this island and colonizing is because they want to make money for the motherland, importing their brandies and their bagaceria, you might say. And so
I guess that's why in this map we also put this this X much further inland, because you know cachaça, like when they said it was banned, they had to turn around and people were like, okay, so not in the port then is what you're saying to me.
Exactly right. And that's the thing.
They just got that right away from the Portuguese area.
So what happened was they taxed the hell out of it. So basically they prohibited importation and then they taxed it so that instantly the cachaça production and industry died, according to the Portuguese anyway. But the farmers were actually the makers of the cachaça because they make it from their field. And what they did was, instead of actually selling it in ports and towns where you get taxed, they decided to sell it to the biggest supplier directly underground, which is illegal, and inland, which is at the mining town. So it's the miners that actually loving the actual cachaça.
Well, you know what's crazy to me? Like you look at the some of the early formations of independence movements in cachaça or in Brazil, And they really they used to use cachaça because it was all family made, and local families would make it in these mining towns, which were much further inland, the towns of the people. And it was almost like they would drink cachaça or make cachaça to say, fobs to the Portuguese. Yeah, it really became a drink of independence and a drink of the locals. Everyone used to make their own rum, their own cachaça and things. So.
And if you want to go further to that, there was actually a political this like a union there, which is the congregation of the miners, and that was the miners and the farmers, and essentially that's how they gained their independence, because of those political bodies eventually. Yeah. But I'm not going to go through the political side of things too much. All I'm saying is that because of the miners and the relationship between the farmers who produced them, cachaça production became quite prime. Although it's underground, they had the sales became quite substantial, that they managed to increase production, but also improve the production of cachaça. And now, when we talk about cachaça in this particular place in Minas Gerais, which is a mining town or a mining area, that's where the best cachaças are, because traditionally that's where all those farmers were actually producing it. And so we have what we now call an artisanal cachaça, and that's what we're going to try first. Hey, Tom.
Well, let's just pull that out, I guess. So I've got mine out.
Can you put in the actual slide in there, and let's show the guys what we're drinking. Ooh. Sorry, the cachaça, which is Saint Germana. So this is go ahead.
No, that's right. So Germania, everyone's got it. The Germania Sol. Oh, just that earthy sort of flavor note, it's just amazing.
Yeah, it is quite earthy, isn't it? It's very, very vegetal. Green.
I guess, yeah. The main points to take away from this, if you're drinking it with us, is this was made from fresh sugarcane juice. So it's unlike other rums which are made from molasses, much like a rum agricole, which is going to come up later that some of you already know about. It's made from the fresh produce, and I always consider, for me, cachaça is about little family origins and tasting the fresher flavors and notes. Most of you will use it in caipirinhas, which makes sense, high acidity sort of content. But for me, it's that fermentation that you taste that I really love. It's still connected to the plant in a lot of ways.
Mm. Yeah, it's very, very different from a lot of the rums. A lot of the rums that we're going to try today are from molasses. It's a molasses base, or what we call a industrial rum. I'd say this is a sugarcane juice based spirit.
Yeah, agricultural.
It's agriculture, or agricole. But then you have the French agricole, which is a little bit different. But what you want to what's interesting here, Tom, is that this is probably one of the oldest cane spirits we know, or we're trying today. But it wasn't actually the appellation or the law regarding cachaça wasn't really around until 2005.
Mate, it started with the US starting to recognize it as a product, and in a lot of ways, the World Cups and things like that, when those conversations were starting to happen, they talked about, well, I think we need some laws surrounding this, and that's really why that they have these sort of regulations. The main points I'd take away for this is the types of regulations they have. So no flavorings and colorings, fantastic. Bottling actually much lower as a requirement, 38 to 48. There's some Navy rum people out there that are turning around saying, what do you mean it can't go higher? Limited dosage of sugar for 6 grams per liter, very close to gin. And the interesting one for me is always max esters. So esters being those really heavy flavors, they're actually saying you can't have too much of that. Cachaça had to maintain its lower ester base and be a smoother sort of flavor. Then you have alcalada, you have envenenada, which are 2 different styles as well for it. But for me, again, it's really about that artisanal message and those flavors really expressing sort of a local farm feeling for me
Yeah.
is sort of how I always define cachaça.
Yeah.
Again,
So
guys, if there's any questions about what we're talking about, please just write into the comments,
yeah,
and we'll get to you. Um,
fantastic.
but no, it really is fantastic in terms of the style and flavor. And I always think it's a good place to start with just understanding rum, I guess. And this, in a way, for me, I know we're calling it rum, but in a way, for me, it was that first process in the Instructio Normativa of rums that was made in the New World.
Yeah, quite interesting. And also be aware before we move on that you have artisanal cachazas, but also you have industrial cachaza, which is a little bit different. It's more industrial, obviously, as it says. Made in, well, it was created in the 1950s, and initially this particular distilleries were distilling ethanol fuel made from sugarcane, and then they decided to create a beverage out of it. So just when you're in the bar, just be aware of the difference between artisanal cachaça. We have Leblon. You probably see it still lying around somewhere. We don't have that distribution anymore here, but I see it in some bars now and again. Absolutely beautiful artisanal cachaça. And also, obviously, you got the Sol, Diamant
The
Sol.
Germania Sol, yeah.
Yeah.
Look, at the end of the day, we know it's for cachaça, for caipirinha, and it really does the job well. So, look, continuing on. So we've got the expansion of the Spanish. Really, was the next major sort of time frame and change in the Caribbean. We see, because of the Tostidas line there, the real start to Spanish exploration continuing forward. We see them into Cuba, Mexico, Jamaica as well. And our next chat about Venezuela and the continuation, this was an amazing time for the Spanish. They were going to explore. They were going to see what was in this new world. And for them, a lot about gold and seeing further inland. They knew that the Portuguese had done what they had just done, which was discover a massive amount of land and basically as far as the eye could see. And the amount of gold that they could find as well was really important to them. I think for me, the crazy part is the extent of those lands, and I guess they really didn't know how far they were going to go.
Absolutely massive, mate.
The expansion through to the New World.
Yeah, like it's for really me, quite. Yeah, go ahead, mate. Yeah.
When they saw places like Venezuela, all they saw were these cliff faces. So imagine like coming along and you're seeing beautiful lands, little vegetal lands and things like that, and then all you see is these disastrous cliffs. I mean, this was the last place that they were going to pull up anchor. But beyond that, the Spanish could really see the beautiful inlands, and there was a lot of disadvantages to pulling up on shore like this that were perfect defenses for the Spanish. So when they chose their lands and chose where to go, these were the sort of things that they really considered. And Venezuela was really important to that because it was so defensible, really along its entire cliff faces, that we see all these defendable ports with the further inland, beautiful, fertile lands. So really important for them as a hub, fundamentally, to set up and be safe as well from invasion from other countries, mainly the Portuguese, because they weren't happy. But yeah, no, it was really important. And I think when we talk about the Spanish style and the Spanish mainland style of Santa Teresa, it really is important, isn't it?
It's absolutely important, mainly because of the land. So when the Spaniards discovered this area, they realized that it was so fertile. It really had absolutely lots of potassium in it. Some of the best sugarcane grows in there because of when we talk about what Tom was talking about the natural kind of like defenses in there. Not only is that defendable from pirates and invaders, but also from the Caribbean Ocean, the Caribbean Sea, where there's like hurricanes and all those really nasty winds coming through. They get filtered through by this mountainous range. And by the time they get to the valley where Santa Teresa is, for example, which is the Aragua Valley, it turns into like really gentle wind and rain. So it's like
Mm.
a perpetual spring. So it's sugarcane absolutely loves it. Not only
Yeah.
that, because it's so isolated compared to the Caribbean. So the Spanish treated the colonies differently in different places. In the Caribbean, they had the iron fist in there, but in Venezuela, they had a bit of a, I don't know, they had it easy, I think.
Well,
Essentially,
I think the defendable port, like the defendable main shipping route,
100%, yeah,
plus these Andes producing natural spring waters that would flow into its arable land. It was
yeah.
perfect for them.
100%. And so they created this particular area in the Venezuela is an important region for Spanish production. But when you really look at Spanish style rum, the style really came into, and we'll get there when we get to the 1860s with Bacardi and the Cuban style. But when we get to the distinctiveness of Spanish style, there's two. Like if you look at the Caribbean, most of their it's about aging as well. So it's two things that really influence Spanish style rum: brandy production and sherry. And
Mm.
sherry, essentially, Central and South America. That's essentially where that sherry influence comes in mostly. So when we talk about
Well,
sherry
speaking about a
production,
people
yeah,
at the end of the day, you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
we
yeah.
are speaking about what?
Sorry, that
You,
was
if
Sherry.
you want to take a serious call, I get it. It's cool.
Yeah,
No, when we're speaking about the people that were making it, just like we were speaking about the Portuguese and the Bagacia, the Spanish were drinking sherry. They were drinking a lot of sherry, a lot of wine, and
yeah.
this would influence their style and their people and kind of their palate in a lot of ways.
Exactly, and so like the share production, obviously they go through what we call a Solera system. So I
Yeah,
guess let's try Santa Teresa now, shall we?
I think so,
Yeah,
mate. I think
yeah,
so.
let's just do it. Yeah, let's just try it, and you will find the
Next one out of the
influence
pack.
of yeah the influence of the Solera system in here is amazing. But let me tell you a little bit about Santa Teresa as well, because this is also part of our portfolio. It's a single cane rum, one of the only few single estate rums. So
Mm,
Santa Teresa has their own little estate there where they produce their sugar. They produce sugar in there and they grow sugar cane. So that comes from there. And like I said, because the land of the Aragua is so rich that they predominantly use 100% of the sugar cane and the sugar and molasses from the particular area. So with Santa Teresa, with it's we have a 1796, which is this particular rum that you're trying today. Absolutely
yeah.
delicious. It has the mother rum. When we take you to a Solera, Solera basically means uh, it's a secondary aging, really. So you need a rum to be able to create to be able to age in a Solera. So the first step is you know blending those rum together and aging them. So it's a blend of light, heavy, and pot still rum that's been aged between
Mm.
the age of 4 to 35 years old. So it's really quite varied, but also you get those beautiful complex flavor coming through.
Well, I
But
always say, like,
yeah,
when you're talking Solera, these rums are that's just what you start the aging process at, because you add it at 4 years maybe to the top, but by the time that's reached the bottom of the Solera system, that's a much older rum.
yeah, exactly. And as you can see, the middle bit is the Crianza de Barril, or what we call the cradle, because they treat it like a baby. That's where the Solera magic happens.
Mm.
So it cascades with those arrows all the way through. That means that the actual rum travels all the way down, because from the bottom, Solera means earth in Spanish. So it starts from the bottom. So that's why. So they
Mm.
extract the actual finished rum on the bottom, which is the oldest rum in that particular series. But they only empty the barrel halfway. So therefore, the third, the second, and the first one gets emptied and filled all the way. It cascades down, right? I hope I'm making sense there. And
No,
that's
no,
the Solera.
definitely.
That's the Solera method of the this particular beautiful
Well,
Spanish style rum.
for me, like, one of my favorite Spanish sayings I've ever heard that really sings true for this style of method is the old teach to the young, as the young teach to the old. And that for
Yes.
me is what Solera is. It's not a single age, single matured rum that has its own individual aspect. For me, Solera is really that combination of old and young sort of marrying into itself and really finding its harmony over 30, 40 barrels that each of those rums goes through together to sort of find itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said before, earlier on, so Spanish style rum is made from molasses, and the molasses essentially is 100% made from this particular region in Aragua. What else is there? So
Well, we see
2003.
the
Yep, yep,
denomination, the origin.
correct.
So,
Yep.
interestingly enough, Venezuela, with all its turmoil at times, is one of the few places that has some quite strong controls on rum production. Much like
Absolutely.
ourselves, has the period no less than 2 years of aging.
Yep. Yep.
Requires only sugarcane and types of oak containers, and then Solera being that principal aging technique for the style.
Absolutely. And I hope you're enjoying this. This is a delicious rum. It's amazing with any whiskey based cocktail or any brandy, I suppose, based cocktail that you can create, like the old fashioned. A rum Manhattan would be amazing with it. I love it with walnut bitters. I have mine with Martini
Walnut
Rosso.
bitters.
Yeah, with that and this absolutely delicious. Yeah, guys. I hope I don't know, Tom. I can't see the question if there's any comments or anything like that.
I
But
haven't
let
seen
me
any
know if
questions, guys. Let us know if you have any questions. Feel free to write in.
or if you're hearing us clearly.
It would be funny if we'd been going this long and no one heard us. That would be intense.
Mhm.
I feel like Georgie Mann down there in Melbourne might have said something to us by then.
Yeah. By the way, guys, you've got this map. It's exactly like the map you're seeing on the screen, and it has those X's in there, and this little circle. That's where you can kind of like follow the steps of the round where the different spirits come from by putting it.
And all those laws are on the back as well. So anytime you want to review the details of the laws and things like that, then please just let us know. There we go. They can hear us. They're just being
Yeah,
shy.
fantastic.
It's
Awesome.
normally about rum 3 or 4 that the people are less shy. But if there are any questions as we go through it, please let us know, and we'll endeavor to answer them. But let's continue on, I guess.
Yeah. Yes. Let's go. What's happened after that, Tom?
Mate. So we're speaking about Spanish extension and periods, but like ultimately we started to see even more things go down. Like ultimately the Spanish were expanding, so the Spanish saw their trade and really started to maximize that trade as much as they can. But as well as that, like we really start to see the intensity of the Caribbean sort of boil over. Everyone was a little bit okay. So the Spanish have the gold mine fundamentally, but with that, other people wanted a little bit of piece of the action, but they weren't allowed because of what the Pope had said with the Tordesillas line. And this is where we start to see pirates enter the mix. So piracy, for me, I guess it's kind of the Cold War of the Caribbean times, because while the English couldn't actually invade the Spanish because they didn't want to upset the Pope, what they really could do was just pay for a lot of people to do it for them. And so what they allowed was these privateers were fundamentally government-sponsored terrorists of the seas. They really started to invade all these ships as they went out through the ocean, and what those richest home paid a little bit to the government, and they really started to terrorize all these caravans and all these gold ships that the Spanish were using.
Yeah, Tom, you know what? I think, look, on the contrary, I think the British didn't care. They were Protestant. they didn't have to answer to any Tordesillas line. You got Portuguese and the Spaniards. Remember, they were the two superpowers at the time. They're the one having the handshake deal, and you got the British. They're going, I don't care what you guys are doing. I don't have a deal with anyone. So I'm gonna go and and this is the thing. people think piracy is illegal back then. It wasn't. It was actually it was actually, that's why they called privateers. They're like private armies. You know
Yeah.
why? Because the French and the British at the time did not have the facility or the power or the might to be able to counter the Spanish and the Portuguese navy. So they decided to hire their own private army, like
Yeah,
with the
and look,
blessing of the
it
crown.
really worked well for them at the end of the day.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
they created havoc. You know, you think about people like Sir Francis Drake, who really just took over the entire Caribbean, and we're sitting here with this mojito in hand.
Yeah, exactly.
And the fact is, the story of the mojito itself comes from Sir Francis Drake, one of the best privateers of his time, because he used to set fire to all the Portuguese and Spanish ports, and got the nickname the Dragon in Spanish, which el Draquito,
El Draco.
el
I love
Dragon,
that story.
el Draquito.
There's an amazing story I heard about his tactics where he uses fire ships. Remember that? It's like he gets an old ship, and then he will just lead it in fire and sail it towards the enemy fleet. It's like a little.
Well, mate,
it's like a wind propelled torpedo. It was brilliant.
Mate, he was definitely like one of the lead tacticians of his time, and the Dragon, as his nickname was, he definitely knew what he was doing. I'll cheers a little mojito to that, actually.
Cheers, guys. Yeah, so just continue on the El Draco. That was the name of a medicine that they were creating in the pirate ships. Essentially, it was made out of a very harsh type of spirit, any spirit they can find. But what you can find there when they depleted the Spanish ships with alcohol is the aguardiente, or fire water, and they added
a lot of aguardiente. Yeah.
Yeah. They put lime in it for scurvy. Obviously, as a ship, you want to get vitamin C, and also there was no refrigeration, so a lot of indigestions happening in there. So they needed some herbs, so mint was added in there. So you have those, and they used to call it a Draquito or El Draco. And then in the 1860s, when Bacardi was prevalent in Cuba, we started appearing in Cuba, they changed that drink into with Bacardi and called it the mojito. Or
actually, I've just got a question come. Sorry, I just had a question come through from Callan about Santa Teresa. There was there any added sugar? I don't believe so, but just checking.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, Callan. No, there's no added sugar in there. It's pretty much like, actually most of our rums would not have any added sugar. It's actually from the barrels in there, and the natural sugars that you get from the barrels. So the aging process makes your rum, you get those fruit notes as it goes. The younger notes, what you get is like, fresh fruits. Like, say, if you taste a Bacardi Casablanca or a white rum, you get some fresh notes of stone fruit and stuff like that. But as you go to age like Santa Teresa, you get more of the figs and all those raisins and stuff like that. They all come from the barrel. So what you do get as sugar in there is natural residual sugar coming from those natural aging process.
I think residual sugar that a lot of people miss as well is the fact that there is a lot of residual sugar found in ex wine barrels, because fundamentally the barrels being used actually retain some of those sugars and sweetness from the barrels themselves. So really nice as well.
I hope that answered your question.
Yep. So continuing with Pirates, there's definitely sugar in my mojito, which I'm happy about. Look, it was crazy time, and the Spanish, the Portuguese were not happy. I think ultimately what they had to do was start to retreat, and there was a battle that you always talk to me about, Lloyd. Which one was that again?
Was that the Santo Domingo? Is that when
Santo Domingo? Yeah.
Apparently, like according to my research, the last straw for the port. So essentially, the Spaniards declared war to the British, right?
Yeah.
In 1585, they said that enough is enough. We're going to declare war. But the last straw was when Sir Francis Drake actually invaded Santo Domingo and plundered it to the ground, and that was it. Like the King of Spain, King Philip I, just went, all right, that's it. I'm gonna destroy you. Like basically, to that particular era there, Spain and Portugal was the superpower, like I said, and to them, Britain was a rogue nation. a rogue nation that's a Protestant nation because they're Catholics, and it was not only that. What's even worse, it was run by a heretic queen, Queen Elizabeth the First, who
Yeah.
who essentially knighted a pirate, like Sir Francis Drake, and made him second in command of the fleet during the Spanish English War. So that didn't really
It
sit
was
well with the
nuts.
Spaniards. And
Well,
this particular, yeah, go ahead, yeah.
and I guess ultimately, like the Spanish did retreat, as we saw there, and they didn't retreat for the reasons of giving up. That was for certain. They mounted one of the biggest fleets of its time. Well, probably one the biggest fleet of its time, which was
It's
the
never been
Spanish
seen before.
Armada.
Yeah, it's never been seen before. This particular, it was the most powerful fleet ever assembled in that era, and for generations to come. You're looking at like 180 ships, Tom, 8,000
Yeah.
sailors. But on top of that, there was about 20,000 soldiers in those ships, ready to invade Europe, England, and a combination of firepower of 2,500 guns, like cannons. I mean, imagine that going towards you.
God.
Uh,
Yeah.
Look, I love talking about this particular era because this was like the turning point. This could have really ended Britain, and this could have been the end of the world we know today. Like there wouldn't have been Britain. There would
Yeah.
they would not never had established in the Caribbean.
Well,
Even
I
maybe
guess.
go to like even discover
Yeah.
Australia. Even get to Australia. Even
Well, there was no
think
way
about it.
that they could have defended like a straight up fight between these two powers. It wouldn't have worked out in the British point. And this Spanish Armada went straight for the neck. They ended up going straight into the English Channel with all these 180 ships, and it was crazy. Like the English didn't have anything to defend against. But the fact is, I mean, that's 180 ships going straight into a channel.
That they
It
don't
was a
know.
dangerous thing to do. And the English actually found themselves, even Sir Francis Drake himself came back for this fight. But the English, they're in the middle of the English Channel. And I don't know if many people know about the English Channel, but it's not safe waters. And they got caught up in one of the most horrific storms that they could have. And with all these ships down a tiny channel, there wasn't much room to move at all. They were screwed.
Mm,
Um,
yeah, exactly.
the ships were falling against the rocks of the English Channel, and they had to pretty much narrow it down right into the middle so that the ships wouldn't hit the rocks. What did
Yeah,
Sir Francis Drake do, Lloyd?
the old fire ship trick.
He knew exactly what to do. He threw down the fire ships right down the middle, and there was nowhere to
Everybody,
go. Literally, you're looking at a fire ship coming straight at you, and if you turn left or right, either way, you're going to hit the rocks. And
yeah,
this entire armada, this not cheap armada to build, was fundamentally destroyed. They completely obliterated the Spanish power in the Caribbean as well, and that led to the British Armada,
yeah,
starting to take over. They started to become a definable power in
yeah.
in the Caribbean because they just won, and they were going to take that time of all that loss from the Spanish crown and start to
Yeah,
develop their own power in the Caribbean.
correct. Yeah, it was the beginning of the end for Spanish dominance, and this is when Britain discovered its own confidence and created, became a naval superpower.
Yeah, yeah.
That was
They
yeah,
moved
that
into
opened it up for
Bermuda
them.
first step. Obviously, with those trade winds in the northern trade wind, they had a lot of easy time to go into Bermuda,
Yeah,
and eventually they'd take Jamaica as well. Jamaica was pretty pivotal for them in the Caribbean, partly because of Port Royal. It was a really like definable port, and once you had it, really easy to defend. So
and also
this
Barbados,
was
Tom.
pardon.
They took Barbados as well.
Also
I think first
Barbados,
before
definitely.
Jamaica, and
Well,
that's where
that's
the word um, that's where the word rum comes from as well, eh?
Yeah, yeah. So we see this early formations of the word itself really start to be defined through Barbados, and a lot of different words there. But rum bullion, alas, kill devil, and this is made from sugar distilled in a hot, hellish, and terrible liquor. Um,
Yeah.
the church wasn't happy with this, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. So essentially, that's essentially where the first word of rum comes in this particular story, which is quite
Mm.
interesting. But
Well,
obviously, as you can see here, rum was not the word rum was not a very nice word to say, because it's like, oh, it's a kill devil. It's like hot, hellish, and terrible, So,
Well, it's
but
interesting. Like, yeah,
yeah,
there's a lot of etymology in the word itself. Like,
yeah,
where did the word rum bullion come from itself? Like, saccharum was one of the first terms used for sugarcane in early Latin.
hmm
Saccharum cerevisiae was one of the earliest sort of uses of the word, and we see that sort of continue on today.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, correct.
it's really interesting to watch and see how these words sort of started to develop. Uh,
Yeah.
but the English were here now as well, so it was definitely it's time, and they definitely took over. We we
They
see
took
the
Jamaica
English
anyway.
definitely, and we really start to see the idea of its own rum form as well. Part of the reason for this is because, just like you were saying before, beer didn't travel. At the end of the day, the English had their beers that they would use on shores. The Spanish had their brandies. So did the Portuguese, the bagacia. But the English, when they got out of port, and especially after these long journeys, they didn't have the opportunity for so much like beer, because it would spoil if it was any length of time at sea. And let's face it, it was probably going to run out before it spoiled anyway.
They love the drink,
So
eh? Yeah. The
so
British, yeah.
they needed to make their own style and develop their own palate, and they worked a lot on trying to develop the English style. I always think about this: did which come first, the horse or the carrot? Um, but basically, it was the fact that they were so used to their whiskies and their big, bold sort of flavors, even their stews and their English palate, that they needed something to match up to it. And when you think about English rum, I always think about the dunder, the funk, especially when you're talking about Jamaica itself. You're talking about a big, bold, and brash flavor. English
Yeah.
stews, talking about whiskey. Whenever I'm trying to talk to someone about whether or not they if they drink whiskey, what to drink, I think bigger flavors, and this is definitely what that sort of palate was for at the end of the day. So
It's really
let's
interesting. Yeah, it's interesting when you say that. I just want to add on that one because of the rum that we're trying today, which is a heavy rum, because British is a heavy rum. But Jamaica became the center of distillation in the Caribbean, mainly because thanks to the British. And the reason for that is because the Spaniards and the Portuguese, as you know, they limited production of spirits in the Caribbean. They didn't allow it because they had their own spirit, but the British didn't. And it's really quite important to remember this, because the British were buying imported spirits from Spain and France, and they were always at war with them. So essentially
yeah.
financing the enemy. So when they, and also obviously they have gin, but gin was quite problematic at the time, with the gin epidemic.
Well,
And you got to
the
remember,
gin depression, yeah.
when we talk about whiskey, and we're talking about that style of whiskey, that didn't really arrive until the 1800s. So the development of whiskey in Scotch terms really didn't develop until the 1800s. Before that, whiskey in Scotland were really heavy. So this is where that heavy style rum
Like
comes
they
in,
had to
that
marry the
flavor.
style of the palate of the people, didn't they? And
Correct.
it was definitely a time of pirates as well. So it was definitely hot, as described in Barbados.
Mm.
Hot and hellish. Like these were intense flavors, and this is where we start to see ester form into rum as well. And
Yeah.
whenever you're tasting an English style, Bundaberg is considered in this as well. Is really one of these heavy ester, high intense sort of flavors.
Yeah.
So we're just tasting the Appleton signature.
And if you look at it in an economical sense, you know, like making rum for the British Empire, they make their own money. It comes in within, you know, it is within the empire.
Oh,
So
it's about who you're selling it to. You know,
yeah,
when the Portuguese were making rum, they were selling it to Portuguese people.
yeah,
When the Spanish were making rum, and we were talking about Solera systems, they were selling it to a bunch of people that drank sherry.
yeah.
So when the English started making their rum for export, they will be making it for that English palate as well, back home. So going back into this, hope everyone's got their rum in their hand. We really taste that heavier ester sort of flavor, and just that point of difference between the three rums we've tasted. You can really see it.
Yeah, absolutely distinct. Like, and this is the reason why we wanted you to you know, taste it. Not only that, realize that, understand the development of individual styles. As you can see, this particular style is heavy. If you put that into a if you put this into a Spanish style or a Cuban style cocktail, it'll change the flavor of it immediately. I think, like what we always talk about, it tiki cocktails, right? With this one,
Yeah.
you want, you know, fresh, heavy juices in there that really can really kind of like that this particular rum will be able, you can still carry the flavor in
Well,
it.
heavy
It's quite
fruit
heavy.
syrups as well were always balanced out. When we talk about how to balance out a lot of drinks, a lot of them will use like lighter style rums, but then they'll use a little bit of Jamaican funk just to balance out the
Correct.
those heavy sweet elements and things
Or
like
vice
that.
versa. You could get a heavy. It's all about the balance, right?
Exactly. Well, Don the Beach Cam used to say, "What one rum can't do, five rums can."
Yeah,
Um,
correct. The more rum,
but can
the
we?
more rums, the better.
Yeah, but yeah, we see this pot still really find its feet in here, and the fact was pot stills were very like based in whiskey production, producing heavier esters, heavier flavors, and dunder pits as well, and use of dunder really crucial to this style. For those of you who don't know what dunder pits are, it's nuts. Like they basically take all this wash, this dirty sort of molassesy alcohol beer, and they put it in a pit in the ground, and they let anything die in there. Like bats could die in there or
It's
anything.
open. Yeah, it's an open. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's open as
yeah.
well. So bird can just like.
Mate, and it's intense. Like this is sort of fermenting, sort of like dying, decay sort of flavor. And there was actually a problem in Fiji where like flamingos were actually coming into the Dundas pits, and they were just sticking their heads in to see what was going on. And from the fumes, they would die and just fall into the pit. and people was like, yeah, cool. So adds to the flavor. This is sort of what dunder is. Real funky sort of flavors, and these are all fermented and cleaned, obviously, and just redistilled, so it's safe. But this is an intense sort of flavor pit, and that's what you always get from an English style or a Jamaica style is really that sort of intensity. So continuing on, we're really now talking about the fact that the English have moved in, the Spanish are there, the Portuguese are there. It was a crazy time. And what we start to see here, and you can see these ships sort of all in line together, a couple of ships behind them, a couple of cargo ships, and then the big war vessels. It was really intense because there was so much travel and trade going on that the English, the French, the Spanish, everyone was sort of trying to go across the ocean, seeking, ultimately needing defenses as well that from their relevant navies. But we start to see trade really start to form, and you know they really are going in between all of their nations. They're really traveling throughout. And this is where we start to see the formation of the triangle trade. A lot of us know about this, and this is the where basically what we see is all the manufactured goods from Europe going down into Africa, the slaves being moved into the Caribbean to produce all the raw materials because sugarcane was going crazy, rum was going crazy, and then those raw materials going back to the developed nations of Europe. And this trade a lot of you can probably see where this is forming from is the actual trade routes themselves and those sea winds. So we really start to see this concept of trade and travel throughout the Caribbean because of it. It's a crazy thing to think about, but would have this trade existed in this form if it wasn't for trade winds? Because trade winds were fundamentally just defining the transit and method of travel between all these nations. Anything else for you to add there, Loy?
Yeah, look, I just wanted to say, obviously with the slave triangle, it was a very, I guess, one of those dark history that we have to really kind of like acknowledge and stuff like that. But it is part of sugar trade and also the Caribbean and the New World, and so therefore we talk about it in terms of rum, because it's an important history of that as well. There's also a theory behind.
Well, mate, to be honest, it's like as someone who's dealt with this for a lot of different training programs, I always find that it's weird that rum's the only one talking about it and comfortable bringing it up. End of the day, like everyone was engaging in this. I don't know if you know about barley production back in those days or picking cotton, but it wasn't something that's only identified in rum production. It's crazy to me that we just seem to be the only ones talking about it.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. But when we talk about history and heritage, we always talk about the looking back, but also with the intent to find out what's next. Learn from our mistakes and also learn what should not have happened. So this is one of those things.
Definitely. So, and what this takes us to is, okay, everyone's at sea. Everyone is engaging in this trade is fundamentally, something the British knew a lot about, engaging in piracy. They had to defend themselves at sea. And with that, we weren't seeing many naval vessels spending much time in ports. And ultimately, we would see this rums in the British Navy itself develop. Not just rums in port, but actually at sea. And we see the formation of the tot, the Navy tot. And this was something on board ships. Sailors would sort of be given this every day at midday, sort of thing. They would be given their daily rum ration. Ours is going to be smaller today, but to put in perspective, this rum ration was a schooner or a flagon. So you can see these pots of sorts. It was a whole one of those, and normally we're talking about Navy strength rum, or we're talking about pretty much a lot more intense sort of rum. It's crazy because the rum in the Navy was normally at much, much higher ABV. When we talk about 151 strength, this is where we start to see that form, and it was because rum had to be higher ABV because it would, if ever it mixed in with gunpowder below decks and below ships decks, it would make the gunpowder unusable. And it was basically a very intense sort of problem to have, because if you were facing a Spanish galleon or anything happened and all of a sudden your gunpowder is unusable, you're finding the nearest port and you're not leaving. So it was a really important issue that I had to manage. And with that, did they dilute it? Did they serve it up straight? I mean, the British sailors were getting saucy. And every day they would have this rum ration. To put in today's equivalent, where we're normally talking about 40% to 38% ABV, it would be the equivalent of a 38% ABV bottle of rum, all downed in one. These guys were going strong and going intense.
Going nuts.
They were going nuts. In fact, it became such a problem that ultimately the Admiralty decided that they would have to dilute the rums, and they would be doing what's called a nor'wester, which was north spirits and west for dilution. And so every time it would be cut by one, it would have the west approach, and west was water, north for rum, and they would start to dilute it. So when we are talking about Navy rum, we are talking about three things: 151 proof, which is your 57%; Navy strength, which was lower, around 54 to 55%. Sorry, 45 to 50%. And then you'd have like your Navy style, which is just fundamentally like in terms of what they were drinking in the Navy, we would be talking about something which was a molasses rich and had a lot more intensity. One of the main reasons for that, and we'll just jump to the next slide here talking about British style, is that when we're talking about British style, we're talking about something that was exposed to the elements a lot more. So on board ships, it would be a lot hotter, a lot colder at night, and it would have a lot more skin contact with the actual oak. And the rums that they were always receiving, especially being in the British Navy, were always from those English islands. So you've got the high esters of Jamaica, you've got Guyana, you've got Barbados, like Trinidad to a certain extent. But these rums were all basically English island styles. And because of that, we started to see the formation of blenders and bottlers. And what that means is that even the English, just like we learned with the Portuguese and Bagacia, wanted to control the style and method of which these rums were made. So instead of little mix and match, which was what was going on board ships, they would start to control that in England, and they'll ship all the rum back to England, and then they'll create mass bottlings in England and blending to create the English tot that they would then send throughout all the ships. A little bit of control there as well, a little bit of money changing hand, but it was very much down that style, down that big, heavy ester style. So what we're tasting today is the black tot, which is 46.2%. So not too intense, but definitely definitive of that British naval style.
Yeah.
Is there any questions or anything, guys? Anyone
I'm enjoying that.
Definitely enjoying it for me.
Awesome.
But yeah, and so when we talk about rum in the Navy, this was that very typical sort of colonial. You can see the richness just like you did in your Jamaican.
Very good.
Yeah, very definable of a British Navy style. But I hope you guys can take away those ABVs as a point of reference for yourselves. When you're talking about Navy rum, that's what you're talking about. So Navy is a style, Navy is a strength, and then 151 is a proof, or Navy proof. And these are all sort of the measures by which things were created differently in the Navy. I always think that these sorts of styles are going to be fundamentally a little bit different. And, we talk about like the purser and these watering down of rations and things like that. It's really interesting to see that as a culture, we've really found ourselves at a lower EBV altogether at our 43s and 40%. But ultimately, we have to find the palate of the people at the time. And this was one of the first occasions we did that.
Cool.
So next up, has everyone had a taste of that?
I'm enjoying that, yeah.
Mate, talk to us about the French.
Yeah, so look, the English were, of course, not the only opportunist during the Spanish expansion. The French had its own ambition, and long before the English, really. And it's really funny because shortly after the Anglo-Saxon War, so English-Spanish War, and the British defeated the Spaniards, they moved in to the Caribbean, taking in the Lower Antilles, we call it now, which is Guadeloupe and Martinique, and I guess much like the Portuguese, and the Spaniards, they were making sugar over that area, and obviously importing it to Europe, to France, to the motherland. And what really happened was and we recently just realized this, is that we all know French rum, or rum agricole, or French rum agricole, as we call it now, is made from sugarcane juice. But before the 1800s, it was actually made from molasses, much like Spanish and British rum. And it wasn't really until the Napoleonic War in the 1800s, when the British decided to blockade the French ships coming from the Caribbean to Europe and stopping any importation of sorts of any goods, that they stopped, stopped making rum from molasses. You see, what happened was there was no sugar coming in France, so Napoleon decided to encourage the production of sugar in Europe by sugar beet. So they researched that, the research
first industrial production.
Yeah, so they ended up. They took them 4 years of hard research, but eventually they managed to produce sugar locally in France. So therefore, the production of sugar in Guadeloupe and Martinique were obsolete, so they couldn't make any rum because there were no sugar production. There's no molasses. So what did the French do? They did what French would do. They decided to take a bit of a shortcut and make eau de vie out of sugarcane juice instead. And hence, this was the birth of rum agricole, or agricultural rum, we call it. So
well, the thing is, I guess they were used to their eau de vies as a style, weren't they? They were used to developing a cognac fundamentally, and ultimately, I do question whether, when you consider how cognac's produced from grapes and fresh grape production, it was only natural for them to take that method of grape production and apply those regulations and rules to sugarcane.
Exactly, and it's really quite interesting because the Martinique AOC, for example, is probably the only non-French appellation, which means that it's only
not
product,
not located on the mainland.
Not located in the mainland, correct. So if you go to the next slide and have a look at the appellation of AOC, so Martinique, maybe you can take them through about it while I'm tasting this. But so
well, let's pour it out all together, I guess. But we are talking about agricultural rum, so rum agricole, as I say in the French, and made from fresh sugarcane juice. There's so many different regulations here, but classic French, they definitely outline 3 particular regions of the island where they make the sugarcane, and they stipulated when it could be harvested on the island, as in peak harvest seasons. And I didn't actually write it on here, but they also have a mill to kill rule as well, where they have to cut that cane and get it through that fermentation process, or at least the juicing process, as quickly as possible to ensure the freshness of the cane juice. For this reason, they actually have some of the biggest still production houses in the Caribbean, because they can't make rum at all times of the year like they do from molasses. They can only make it in season. So they have some of the biggest still houses, like probably outside of Bakari, to be honest.
It's very, very similar to to cognac. The way they in cognac they actually just make it from March to the beginning of spring kind of thing, and they have like during summer they actually have a bit of a break. So it's very similar as well.
Classic French, yeah. I've actually got a friend that's retired to Martinique.
Beautiful.
And he's living a life, let me tell you. But yeah, so these are the sort of this is the style. And guys, when you're thinking at home how to blend or use French rum, like I always say, tiponche is that classic style. A little bit of lime, dash of sugar maybe, and some soda water. Yeah, that is all. Like that is your main sort of way to maximize the flavor of an agricole.
It has a very, very distinct flavor. It's very different from the other rum styles that we tried before, as you can see. So you got to be able to create it. So tea punch is the way to go. maybe some, yes. So it's really light. Just the freshness of the, the citrus in there, and the freshness of the flavor of this particular rum
Yeah,
really
yeah.
goes well together with that.
To put in perspective though, the Martinique people actually have
The,
14
yeah,
14 drinking rituals over the course of a day,
correct.
at
Yeah,
intervals in which they drink particular styles of drinks and things like that, and it really is interesting. I couldn't agree more with Al over here. 15
yeah,
mils, agricultural daiquiri, fantastic, amazing. That and Araguente as well. Like you look at how you use it. Honestly, just that little bit to those fresh acidic sort of just cocktails, fantastic.
yeah.
If you
That's
ever want to
great.
look at some recipes or tiki drinks as well, there are some tiki drinks that actually call for just that little touch of agricole on the back.
Yeah, gives you
Great
that
way to
really
start
nice,
it.
really gives you that dimension, the more
But I guess
complexity and
that's why
everything.
we're talking about what we talk about today. Like we are talking about styles of rum and why they are so different and different in terms of the cocktails you need to use them for. It really is important that you identify the right cocktail for the right time at the end of the day. I this just makes me feel like I'm in France, sort of thing. At a time when we're talking about escapism and the inability to do so, this is sort of that idea of escapism to me.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think when we talk about the Caribbean, even then they were talking about escapism. They were talking about a new world. They were talking about finding and discovering a place that was new to them. I spoke about trade winds before, but their ability to travel between place to place, it was an exotic time. We can't even fathom the concept of travel right now in our own lives, let alone how they felt about it back then. Uh, and especially for new and exotic places like Cuba at the time.
Mm, exactly.
Like Cuba was crazy, right?
Yeah, look, Cuba. What we're getting to the Cuban style rum now, and we all know that Cuba is the cradle of the world's greatest rum based cocktail. You think about the mojito, the daiquiri, the pina colada, the Cuba Libre. But ironically, in this story, in the history of rum, Cuba was relatively late to the party when it comes to rum production. And I think this is because when when we were talking about Spanish style rum and the Venezuelan style rum, we we all now know that production of any sort of spirit in the Caribbean were prohibited by the Spanish in the Spanish colonies.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
therefore, and the reason for that also is that Cuba did not actually have any sort of sugar industry at that time. Um, they were more of a copper mine. So
yeah.
if you think about the daiquiri mines, when we talk about the history of the daiquiri, you always talk about the copper mines there, in the town of Daiquiri. So that was a big industry, and it wasn't until the mid 1750s, right, where um, they kind of like uh, the British took over. Like basically, there was a 7-year war, a very very short war between Spain and Britain, and the British invaded Cuba, took it, but to Spain, Cuba was their golden island, right? They
Yeah.
will fight tooth and nail to protect that. It's the biggest island in the Caribbean.
Well, man,
It
it's
was rich,
crazy.
and
It was so
yeah,
essential to them,
it was very very essential. But also, but during this time they took over for 4 years, but during this time they actually introduced sugarcane production and a little bit of distillation as well. So when they managed to take over back, so it went to Britain, and then Spain took it back again 4 years later, and by the time they took back the country, the island, they decided to let the sugar industry flourish. They let it go.
Yeah,
It makes
yeah.
sense. It makes total sense.
Well, they want to
Um,
take care of their people at the end of the day. It was really important to them that everyone felt valued.
yeah, exactly. And because of this, Cuba was really important. Like I said before, Spain, mainly because of the trade winds. Again, we go back to if you actually look at the way the trade winds is on the next
Well, you know
slide.
how I like talking about the trade winds.
Exactly.
But
Um,
no, you're dead on. Like basically, when we talk about these trade winds and the way that it would develop,
yeah,
the flowing of the nations. You can see here that majority of the time you'd have to go past Africa to actually approach the Caribbean, especially if you're using ships powered by the winds. And then the way these trade winds work, that fundamentally, if you're coming from any of these southern ports or any of these southern Caribbean islands, you actually have to find your way north to actually take those trade winds back to Europe.
yeah,
And one of those most northern points for the Caribbean was Cuba, especially that port of Havana there. It was essential that you had to go past this to get home. And like we said about the caravans themselves, they would need to get everyone together to safely go across ports. And enter the port of Havana. The port itself, you can see here that the port itself is actually huge, massive ability to store different ships, and especially those gold ships that were coming back from Mexico and South America. And you can see these actual ports on here, these pinnacle forts they could actually put on to the harbor coastlines. And what they would do was just fundamentally all the ships would hide in port. Anyone attacking was pretty much destroyed at that point. They had learnt from the invasion from the British.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and
And
this became the Golden City.
it's,
It was
yeah,
defendable, it was safe, and it was the last port of call before you had a
yeah,
chance to go back home.
yeah. Essentially, it's the last stop before. And when I explain about this particular side of the story, is that it's like an international airport. Think about it, like everything stops there before going to a long haul, like a Heathrow. From everything, every town, every city in Europe stops there before going to,
Mm.
say, the U.S. It's the same with Havana, but it's the only one in the Caribbean, in the Americas. That's it. That's where
Yeah,
everyone stops.
and especially since the Spanish were probably the ones that were doing the best out of the entire Caribbean.
So you
Like there was
yeah,
so many deals done, last minute
you
deals.
you can imagine the amount of wealth coming in and out of Havana at the time in Cuba. So this is where
Mm,
the story of our next rum starts. When
definitely.
if you look at the
Well,
next
with this, we
slide,
start to see that independence movement
yeah.
start to
So yeah,
develop, and we
exactly.
start to
So
see the new world really start to open up and start to find itself. Ultimately, the Caribbean was becoming itself. We saw Haiti form and separate itself from the Spanish islands and the French islands, and we saw United States of America start to form as well and fight off. The interesting thing for me here was that so much turmoil was going on with the French being kicked off Haiti. The English are really not doing well with the new Americas. But it's interesting to me to see that the Spanish themselves were actually doing significantly better. Is that right?
well, if you look at it, imagine this is the 1800s, right? This is the turn of the 19th century, and you got the Napoleonic War. So Europe was at war with everyone. They were so busy, except for the Spaniards. Like you said, there was the revolution happening in the Caribbean. The face of Caribbean is changing, but the French and the British were at war with each other and against their colonies, and Spain was in relative peace. So this was really, and thanks to the British for leaving the economy of sugar production in Cuba.
Mm.
Cuba became such an, especially with sugar industry. This was the time when
Well, it
all
was
the
already
sugar
the
coming.
Golden City.
Yeah, the Golden City was the main production port for sugar production. It
Mm,
outstripped every
mm.
single sugar production from Britain in the 1820s, and by the 1830s, it became the single most powerful colony in the world. And so in the 1830s, they needed people to migrate to Cuba. They needed more
And we
people
really
with
start to see
skills.
this new world develop around it.
exactly, opportunities from, like, if you think about middle class and poor families and people in Europe hearing about this new opportunity that you go in a new world, starting a new life, making a name for yourself. There was an immigration boom in the Americas, not only in Cuba but like in the new world. And this is
Yeah,
where,
yeah.
for the Spaniards point of view, if you're from Spain, you'd go, I want to go to Cuba. This is where, like, so this is where,
Like we all don't want to right now.
yeah, exactly. So enter Don Facundo Bakari Maso, this young Spanish, who was brave enough to take a
Very
fearless
long journey.
decision at the age of 15 to travel from Spain to Santiago de Cuba, which is south of Cuba, to start a new life. Uh, First of all, the reason for this is he moved because his brother moved there. It's two of his brothers, so they have a bit of a little business in there, and so he started working for them for a little while until he was around about in his 20s. By the time he was 20s, he was very entrepreneurial. He was very a stout kind of, like, he had this really good business sense, and he was
Yeah.
really watching what people are actually doing in Cuba, and he realized that, one, there was a lot of people immigrating from Europe. Secondly, um, if you want to drink, the only drink that you can afford is this really harsh uh, cane-based spirit called aguardiente, or known as fire water in Spanish. Very, very cheap, very pungent, very dark, and there was no refinement process. And third,
Hence the El
if you want to,
Draquito, right?
yeah, exactly. And then third, if you want to drink something really good, well, you got to get imported goods like European spirits, which is super expensive. So he got into
Yeah,
this
yeah.
business of importing European spirits, right? So he thought, well, I'm gonna, make sure that, like, get some spirits, because this was the opportunity for him to open up his own business. He had a grocery store essentially, but he also sold European goods like chocolates, lollies, but also fine wine and spirits. Things were doing well, really good. Got married, some kids, but I don't know if, obviously Melbourne had a bit of an earthquake few weeks ago, right? That was last week, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like quite a. So it's exactly what happened to Don Facundo in Santiago de Cuba in 1852, and devastating earthquake, really, because, like, um, hit the city, and then straight
I guess
after
it was
that,
time to rebuild at the end of the day as well. Like it
well,
was.
there was an epidemic of cholera. So, like, yeah. So essentially, his business kind of like got affected. Escaped Cuba for a little while, but came back, and then, yeah. So he had to rebuild, because eventually he had to declare himself a little bit of a bankruptcy because of his business. But fortunately, he had enough money. His wife inherited some money, and, like, uh, and he needed to rebuild, like you said, Tom. So, but
Yeah.
what did he do? He had this vision. He had his vision. So he always dreamt of doing something locally in Cuba, something, a spirit that's locally made, affordable for every single Cuban, but as good as a European spirit. So
Well,
this is where the venture for this style of rum started in 1852, and 10 years of development and research. He ended up creating what we now know as a Cuban style rum. So Don
hmm.
Facundo Bacardi in 1862 February 4 bought himself a secondhand distillery and created a new style of rum, like unlike any others, um, made in Cuba. He created three uh, different rums: Carta Blanca, which is a white rum; but Carta Oro, which is a gold rum; and now what we're trying today, guys, is Bacardi Gran Reserva Ocho Años. So if you want to grab that, we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna talk about the different rums that he's created, but also the style of rum that is a Cuban style rum, and the significance of what Cuban style rums created.
Well, I mean, you just can't. I guess you can't have a conversation about rum without talking about the Cuban style of rum. Like the diversity of styles that we're seeing today are just so varied and so interesting. Like this was fundamentally a formation of its own style, and I guess an industrial style in a lot of ways. Like it was the way in which the world was coming along, and it was learning from processes at this point. It had only had fire water before this stage, so it was the steps, I believe, that started to take it further.
I think
Right?
I think it's more of a refinement. It's a style of refinement, Tom. What we're trying
Mm,
to the significant thing that he's created is he created a significantly consistent product that you can taste. Like even to this day, you can guarantee that the Bacardi rums that we're trying taste exactly the same as what the same flavor profile that he created over 150 years ago. Why is that? Because he defined those process. Those He created four pioneering process, which is in the next slide, by the way. So what you have
yeah,
there is the process that every single rum that we've tried before has started to develop. So utilizing a strain of yeast, or the fermentation has been controlled so that you get the consistent kind of like fermentation process all the time, giving you the right and proper flavor profile that you want all the time to create the rum that you want. He created a parallel production process, which means that he created a new number of rums. As you can see with, if you look at the Spanish style rum like Santa Teresa, creating a pot still, a heavy, and a light rum, exactly the same as what Bopukundo pioneered. He created a light and a heavy rum. So basically, he distilled two different rums. So he had the ability to blend them and the ability to be flexible with the flavor profile that he can shape and control. And then he had a refinement process that no one's really looked at, developing the flavor through aging. So
yeah,
aging process at the time was really used to, well, barrels were only used to ship or transport spirits and rums, but he was the first person in the rum world to actually uh, create the flavor profile that he want
purposeful.
by purposeful by aging different rums in different periods of time to identify the flavor that he wants, and then started blending them together,
You know,
which is
I always consider port production here because the way that port was aged, and this gives you an idea of the times, is that the further it traveled from its home port in Portugal,
yeah,
the better it was considered. They didn't know that it was because it was aging longer. They just knew that it would taste better if it had gone further away.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
and this is, I mean, this is the extent of knowledge at the time. They just didn't know that you could just purposefully age.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what happens to barrels. But finally,
Mm,
one thing that he really was really known for, and it's won him a lot of award, is the process of filtration. So he created this charcoal filtration process. It's not like just putting, not like getting a wood and then just turning it into charcoal. He actually had different types of trees and turned it into carbon charcoal, so he can shape the flavor. And this is used so that you can actually kind of like balance the flavor out by utilizing the right amount of charcoal. And this is the thing that took him 10 years to develop. The Bacardi has got the same process from Bacardi Ocho, Bacardi Carta Oro, and Bacardi Carta Blanca, but the difference is the age and also the charcoal recipe that you have in there. So they use the same yeast, they use the same process in distillation, but the purpose, the aging of the rum and the blending are all different, and also the charcoal recipe that you use in there. Hence, when you look at the Carta Blanca, it's aged for 2 years, but it's clear. So when you age something, right, it's gold, it's amber, but then when you charcoal filter it, you use the charcoal that's quite compact because you wanted the specific flavor out of it, something that
mm.
doesn't dominate or disappear. So it's delicious in citrus drinks or
Well, it makes it a
sparkling
clean.
soda.
It definitely makes it more of a cleaner sort of flavor and spirit as well. Like it creates that lighter essence in a way.
Yeah, it was unlike any other at the time. If you have to like just imagine you were in the
Especially considering the
1860s.
impurities that were in rum at the time.
Yeah, you were in the 1860s. What was there? Brandies. You have again, you have whiskeys in there. You have bathtub gin, and then really really dark rum. And you have this vodka wasn't even produced. Vodka wasn't even utilized in cocktails at the time. Not until the 1930s. So you have this particular rum called Cata Blanca. and creating all this delicious cocktail like the daiquiris. You can't do that without that rum, you know.
Yeah.
And also this particular rum that we're trying, guys, which is the Bacardi 8. This particular rum for Don Facundo was a special reserve. This was only for his family member. It was so hard to make for him that this particular rum was not actually sold to the public until 1996, over 100 years later, when they decided to actually bring out a special edition rum for the Cigar Aficionado magazine subscriber, and it was sold. This bottle was sold for $450 to start off with, Tom. So it was a really limited edition. But in 1998, they decided to put it back in the portfolio as part of the Bacardi family because it became really popular. So that's why we're enjoying it now. The age statement that you see in here is 8 years. Probably the only rum that we have in this this cluster that doesn't actually that actually has an age statement. So it's a minimum of 8 years.
So far, right? I mean, there's going to be things coming forward, isn't there? Surely.
100, yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna have the 10 years old, the 16, and we'll also have the 4. But yeah, that's hopefully coming out in the next year or so.
Can't
But
wait.
yeah, guys, so that's essentially. I hope you're enjoying the Bacardi 8. Absolutely delicious. It's great for an old fashioned. I'm sure you know what to do with it.
Well, that was the creation, but I guess the continuation for Bacardi as well was how it would grow in the markets at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Look, it's won a lot of awards. In fact, Bacardi is the world's most awarded rum. And earlier on the year, when its production around the 1860s, 70s, and 80s,
we think about what comes in the early 1900s. It was definitely
even in the early 1900s, it was winning a lot of awards. But these awards were awards for innovation. It was the awards for Don Facundo's 4 pioneering steps. And imagine this. This was not being matched against other rums. This was being matched against other technologies at the time. Edison's moving picture, and it was like Alexander Graham Bell's telephone. Those were the competitors at the time. The Eiffel Tower, it won an award in Paris in 1888, and in Madrid as well the same year. And unfortunately, this is when Don Facundo passed away in 1888. When in 1888 they got the biggest accolade, which is, I don't know if you see a bottle of Bacardi, you'll see in the middle of the bottle there's a warrant. So you can see not that one, but with Bacardi Carta Blanca there's a royal seal. I've got it here. So that
the
is
Carta Blanca.
Yeah, so the Carta Blanca that I've got in here.
I love that yours has Loy on it, by the way. That's okay.
So right in the middle, you've got the royal warrant. It's the only rum that actually has a royal warrant, given by Queen Christina Maria III, for winning all these awards for innovation, putting Cuba in the map, and also the Spanish heritage of rum production.
Nice.
But yeah, so it became quite popular, but really it became a global phenomenon thanks to a particular era in the 1920s in the US.
Crazy times.
Crazy times where we kind of like are similar to where we are now.
What were they thinking?
Yeah, so the US decided to enact a prohibition. So you can't drink, you can't serve alcohol, you can't make cocktails, you can't open up a pub in the US. So it was a dry country for 11 years until 1931. It was crazy. And so a lot of people, the thing about that, the beauty about that is you can still travel, Tom. Not here, not the moment we can't travel. It's crazy. But so a lot of people in Miami or the US over the weekend, they'll just fly to Cuba. It's a half an hour flight, $24 it's gonna cost you. So fly in there and you can drink, you can party. It's absolutely amazing. It's like it's like a black and white. You can go. You got 2 choices. You can go and drink illegally and get arrested, or get poisoned by some sort of bathtub gin in the U.S. and an underground like blind pig kind of like establishment, or you can go to Cuba and drink with some delicious flavors. Drink. You have whiskey there. You have brandy. You got everything. But of course, what they discovered was rum, Bacardi rum. but also a lot of businesses in US, the US moved there. A lot of bartenders moved there. You know, if you can't make drinks in the US, you can't serve alcohol, you're out of the job as a bartender. So a lot of them moved to Havana, and they discovered Bacardi. They discovered the mojitos and the daiquiris. And the first recorded name mojito, Bacardi Mojito, was in the 1930, when in the first cocktail book by Sloppy Joe's, which is amazing. But also they created their own cocktails in there. The Prohibition, the Cuban style cocktails, the Mary Pickford, new era cocktails like El Presidente, the Nacional, all the drinks that we're actually enjoying today. Even the Pina Pria, which is a like before Pina Colada was created in 1950s.
Yeah.
That was born in the golden age of rum cocktail in the 1920s. So that's the reason why the Americans fell in love with rum, and by the end of the Prohibition, in 1931, Santiago de Cuba, the production, that facility, and the distillery there couldn't keep up. So in 1931, they opened up another distillery outside Cuba, in Mexico. The first one, because they had a facility there, they were going to close that anyway. But when Pepin Bosch, we'll talk about him later on, went in there, uh, he was tasked to close down the facility, because he wasn't making a lot of money. He realized that the condition was perfect. They had sugarcane in there. It had a beautiful weather for aging. So he just went and took the decision to buy the land and turned it into a distillery within a year, which was a
Well,
fantastic decision.
mm, mm.
And then in
I mean,
1930, yeah.
it's always
So
interesting to me. I always look at some of these early stories about Bacardi's journey through the through Puerto Rico, through Mexico, and it always comes back to that common theme that they would always go back to the four pioneering steps to really hone in the style and intensity of Bacardi from all that way back. Those four steps were the key to
well,
always
this
getting the production right.
exactly, Tom. This is where the point of not where rum is made, but the
The
right
culture of how you make
conditions
it.
in the way in the way you make it. Yeah. So you can make it as long as you've got the right yeast, as long as you've got the right production process, as long as you right the aging conditions, then you can make rum. It doesn't have to be, so Cuban style rum doesn't have to be made in Cuba. And this is the reason, and that Bacardi proved that when they did it in Mexico. And then 2 years later, they had to open up a distillery within the U.S. territory, the which is Puerto Rico. In 1933, they opened up a distillery in Puerto Rico, which is right next to Cuba. So
Yeah,
exactly the same condition, exactly the same kind of like temperature and climate. And
climatic
the reason
conditions. Yeah,
and the reason for that is because the U.S. were protecting their spirit industry, so they're taxing everything that's being imported within the U.S. Heavily. So it makes economical sense for Bacardi to open up a distillery there to cater for the American demand
yeah.
for rum. Um,
Well, they couldn't have predicted what was coming next, right?
no, absolutely not. But then, like great, it was a great era, Prohibition, 1930s, 1940s, and the 1950s, pretty much golden for Bacardi. Became international brand. But then in the 1950s, again, there was a little bit of political instability all over the Caribbean. And you remember the 50s were the time when there was the Cold War. You had uncertainty in the Caribbean, and a lot of the Spanish colonies. There was dictatorship as well. And we have this
Yeah.
guy in 1950. In 1950, there was a guy called Fogesto Batista. He was a freely elected president for Cuba in the 1950s, but in 1954, he lost the election, and he just didn't like it. So he decided to take power because he was an
Yeah.
ex-general. So he used the army to take over the country and declared himself a dictator. So in 1955, Bakari was threatened by this particular change in democratic tradition, because they've been fighting. If you think about Cuba, they were like, you know, under Spain, under the U.S., and now they've finally got their independence, and then there's this dictator here. So they went,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So they kind of like decided to move their trademark in 1955 to the Bahamas to protect the assets of the Bacardi family.
Well, probably a
Um,
smart move.
it was quite a
I mean, they're
smart move.
still trying to cater to that American market as well. So
Absolutely, absolutely. But and also the Bahamas is a very important facility for Bacardi because the Commonwealth, there is also a different trade agreement between Britain and the US, so they needed to have a facility there. But so it wasn't Fagesto Batista that actually created uh, the demise of the Bacardi in Cuba. It was Fidel Castro. So in 1960, he was hailed a hero. Actually, he ousted Fagesto Batista as a rogue general. Came in the city victorious. It was supported by a lot of the industries and people, including the Bacardi family, and he promised free elections and everything. But in 1960, he changed his political stance and turned Cuba, he nationalized Cuba and turned it into a communist government.
yeah,
And
yeah,
not only that, he decided to confiscate all the companies that's owned privately without compensation. So the government took over it. So that really affected a number of industries. You're talking about, all the industries, cigar, rum, um, sugar production, mining, all those were owned by different families and different companies. And
yeah.
so Bacardi lost overnight in October 14, 1960. They lost 80% of their assets overnight. 80%. It was like their
That's
house, their
crazy.
facility, the Santiago de Cuba distillery, their land, everything. And they were exiled out of Cuba. So this is where you think, oh, that Bacardi's finished. That's it. They can't, But that's where this fight started, where the La Gran Familia became a thing. Where a gentleman by the name of Pepin Bosch, he was a family member. He was the person who led the Bacardi from the exile, and
Yeah,
basically sent out a letter to every single Bacardi employee and family to say, "Hey, we have lost Cuba, but we are not finished yet." I think it's still on this next slide, Tom. Um,
yes, it's coming now. Yeah,
yeah, it says basically we are not finished. If you can get out of Cuba, come and find us. Come to Puerto Rico. Come to Mexico. Come to Miami. We are not finished elsewhere. Elsewhere, we are still alive. We will house you. We will look after you. We will give you a job if you can get out of Cuba. So that was the creation of the La Gran Familia, we call it here, and that was the creation of the international brand called Bacardi.
well, it's
Um,
interesting. Like I even look at my bottle here, the Bacardi Casablanca we pulled up before, and you see the earliest signs of the El Coco.
yes, correct. I
You
didn't
know,
really mention El Coco, essentially a symbol of resilience, and how the fight of the Bacardi family and their flight from Cuba and how they survived and thrived because El Coco was actually a story of the first palm tree that Don Facundo's son Facundo Jr. planted in the first distillery, and this particular tree just they nourished it. It was very resilient. On the first a few years later, with the first Bacardi distillery, it burned to the ground, and when people woke up, there was nothing left except for this particular tree. So what the Bacardi family did was they created a bigger distillery on top of the old distillery, but they didn't cut off the tree. They worked around it, and years later, it became like 5, 6, 7 times bigger, and they didn't they just kept it,
Hmm.
and up until there was the prophecy they called the El Coco prophecy that the Bacardi family will only the El Coco will only die if the Bacardi family is no longer in Cuba. And 100 years later, or over 99 years later, in 1959, it withered and died. And in 1960, the Bacardi family was exiled from Cuba. And
yeah, it's
so
crazy.
this is the story of rum, guys. This is the
And they
story of,
plant that everywhere the Bacardi is today, isn't it?
yes, yes, as a tradition. every single facility and distillery and head office in all over the world for Bacardi. We have our we have a symbol of an El Coco somewhere in the world. So you can see, you probably know that this is the three facilities or distilleries we had originally: Puerto Rico, Cuba, and Mexico. And then we lost Cuba in the 1960. And after that, to cater for the amount of the 80% that we've lost, there was a number of facilities and distilleries that was opened up all over the world, creating the same Cuban style rum. But obviously, as years go by and as restriction and globalization kind of like came, the trades became relaxed. We didn't need to have all those because, politically speaking, some of those distilleries need to be there because we needed to, because of trade laws essentially, and also because we needed more distilleries to make more rum when we
Yeah,
lost
yeah.
Santiago de Cuba. But as we progressed in the 1980s and the 90s, they decided to not downsize, but make mega distilleries and shut down a lot of the other ones, just to make sure that we keep on consistent product. And also with transport and the ease of business, it was easier to actually do business in a centralized point.
Mm.
So now we only have the facility in Mexico, in Puerto Rico, and in India. But India is actually only for the Indian market.
It's only its own market, which is a huge one. But yeah,
It's a huge market. The Indian army actually gets rations of Bacardi, interestingly
look, it's
enough.
it's fascinating for me. Like I always consider how it's expanded and how like come so far in the modern world, if not part of the modern world, to define itself. We look at this map and we consider the intensity of war, peace, and the crazy world that rum's grown up in, and the culture that it's grown up in. But all of them did. And Bacardi was no stranger to that. At the end of the day, it was something that it had to find and deal with its own path. Like we saw the
Yeah,
laws of other nations and the laws of other states, and
yeah,
in a way, for me, Bacardi always defined its own laws.
exactly. And also, when we look at all these rums and look at all the things that happen in the Caribbean and around this map here, we see the diversity of rums. We see that, there's rum for everybody. It's and we see that rum is one family from
Yeah,
different countries. It is that it's the reason why we created this particular session, is because um, rum has is although it's different, it has a standard. It has different standard, and you know
well, it's defined by culture in a lot of ways, and I always think
yeah,
that when we talk about rum, it's important to remember that the people decide, the palate decides, and the culture decides. Ultimately, rum has to be defined by its qualitative aspects and how it defines itself. And a session like this really makes me realize why we use rums different ways and why we use the rums that we do for the drinks that we do. Um, you know, Quintessentially, you need to make rum. You need to make rum cocktails for the particular culture and style that those cocktails were created. Whether it's the El Draquito with your Picardi Mojito, or whether it's your Tiponche or something else. Like you have to define rums for its styles.
yeah. And actually,
Personally, I can't wait for my
yeah,
next daiquiri once the bars reopen.
same here, same here. And when you look at that, we look at, like I said, when we look at the heritage, we look at the history, and we look back. But the intent is, what's next? That is what heritage is all about. We want to learn from the past so we can predict the future. And then we were like, this is the discussion that we have with rum, and with Bacardi, as a brand. We want to lead the category. We want to make sure that it's in a healthy space. We want to make sure that our bartenders are, looking at it, that it's fit
I
for a
feel confident.
consumer. Yeah, they feel confident to talk about rum in general, not just Bacardi, but holistically the whole rum category. But also we want to lead the charge to premiumizing rum, giving people the ability to navigate the different. That's why we're putting age statement in it, so they'll go that a 4-year-old is more obviously not is less expensive than an 8-year-old, because the aging process is a little bit longer. It takes a lot of time. There's a lot of evaporations that's happened. Yeah, for every Bacardi 8 that's been bottled, a whole bottle are already evaporated. So the longer it takes, but also it's the experience. The longer the rum is aged like whiskey, it's more delicious. It becomes more rare. It becomes more of an experience. But also we have innovations like the Bakari mojitos. We've got
Look, I think
some
defining rum's place is the key here, and it's hard because so many other spirit categories can define it through the laws of particular islands, because that's the only place that those products are made. But it's never been that case for rum. Rum has to be defined by the culture and the people that invented it. And as we're seeing today, it really is wide and varying. I can't stress enough. Like it's great that someone like Bacardi takes this time and chooses to define all rum throughout the Caribbean, to demonstrate the place of every product in its category. No other brands are doing this, and the ability to show Fitzroy in this today, the ability to show everyone around Australia, if not the world, how to define these categories is fantastic. Really important for all of us to be able to find the rum for us. I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about how do we recommend the right rum? How do we tell people what rum to have and how to enjoy it? And, seeing the history and seeing the attributes like we could today. Thank you so much for letting us do that.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for your time. I think, that's our 2 hours up.
No, I really hope everyone enjoyed it.
Yes, I hope. Is there any questions in there at the moment, Tom? Or
no, we're all good for questions. But what we're going to do now is we'll jump offline and we'll jump onto the Zoom. You all should have received a Zoom link. I can imagine a lot of you are already tired or onto your other drinks. But if you want to join us for a quick chat, please jump over. We're gonna jump on that Zoom link in a second, and we'll catch up and have a little chat. Thank you for holding your questions. I know it's a long presentation, but it's fantastic to have been able to present this to you guys today in Fitzroy, and hopefully we'll be down there soon to drink some rum with you all.
Yes. Hopefully we hopefully we can do this in person, guys. Thank you so much.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Lloyd. Really appreciate your time, and
thanks for the
awesome
time,
presentation. Tom. Thank you so much for letting us do it.
Thank you. See you soon.
See you soon, buddy. Take care.